It says so-called event data recorders that function much like the black boxes in airplanes, in which are now installed on virtually all new vehicles, can give investigators incriminating details about your driving behavior in the final seconds before a crash. So this is the excuse for putting it in. I was giving an excuse. And then one of the guys says, I didn't think my 98 Saturn was new enough to have the data recorder, but apparently it does. And I think it should be up to me to decide how and where I share that information with someone else. Why should you why should you even think about sharing it with someone else? It's your car. It's your person. It should be private to you. He says, if I were given the opportunity to agree to have this on a vehicle and I buy it, then that's probably, it would be okay. In other words, you're given the choice. He says, but if I own the car, he says, it's my business what's on the recorder, and no one should be able to access unless I say so. Details that can be scrutinized include how fast the vehicle was going, as well as whether the brakes or accelerator were being pressed, which way the car was being steered, and yes, even whether the occupants were wearing their seatbelts. I wonder what else it knows what you're doing. The data is also always being recorded, but it's only saved to the device's memory if an airbag deploys, automakers say. That's not true, because I've talked to some mechanics who deal with this is a special department, and they go by the year actually. They know exactly the whole history for the whole darn year, and the dates of everything. Back in a minute with more on this after this break. Hi folks, I'm back cutting through the matrix and just talking about the black boxes and the fact that you got no choice in these matters anymore today with the brand new cars. So they're giving you no choice at all. They're simply in them and you accept them, or if you want the car, or that's that. You can't disable them either apparently, because they say it's integral to the car's computer system and it would upset all the rest of the stuff. So I don't know. I'm sure someone out there knows how to do it. But it's just disgusting that you're not only getting tracked and traced with a lot of different versions of cars, GM especially with OnStar, but you're also getting all this data collected all the time on you. And I think it's pretty disgusting. But most folk will put up with it too. They just put up with things and they adapt, and they adapt, as Darwin says, we're the most adaptable species, and that works against us because there's those at the top who know how to use our adaptation processes for their own particular use. And it's also the same thing too with they're putting cameras. They want to put cameras in the cars. Now this is the next step. I'll put a link up at cuttingthroughthematrix.com at the end of the broadcast about that too. And all these articles I mentioned, in fact, I put the links up at the end of the night. But they want to put cameras in your car as well, and no doubt to see who's in it. That's the real reasons I'll be in it. Never mind what excuses they give you. But the government's thinking about actually making it mandatory. And how wonderful a system where you just can't get away anywhere. You know, Orwell had that in his book 1984, and even in the film versions of it too, they had the same thing, where even they had microphones and so on in trees, and cameras in trees in the forests. So everywhere you went, you're being watched somewhere. And then we found out just a few years ago they're actually doing that. They're actually putting microphones along the forestry in case the people came on these preserved areas and had no right to be there. It's just astonishing. We're living in a system. But most folk they'll protest their student fees and their loans and the whole bit and the payments, but they won't protest the fact that they're growing up in a world with utterly no privacy whatsoever. You know, they don't mind. You understand, when you don't mind about privacy, your survival instinct is defunct, is kaput, is finished. It's finished. And how bad it really gets too is to do with propaganda. You live through propaganda. All mainstream and a lot of the non-mainstream is propaganda. Everybody wants you to think a certain way or do a certain thing or join something. And whenever you're asked to join something, I'm always wary, because it's always to benefit something you think you understand, but you don't. Someone else wants to use you, in other words, for some purpose or other. So be very, very careful about that. But here's an article here about the Euro Parliament in Brussels, this new Soviet system that's ruled by secrecy at the top, where they won't even tell you who's at the top of it. And they have members of parliament that do nothing except sort of make little sarky comments at each other, snide comments, little giggles and laughs, but they have no power to change anything or introduce laws or change laws. It's all done by the secret bunch above them. And they call this democracy. Anyway, the Euro Parliament opens its own propaganda centre, and you're paying for it. Today was the first open day of the new Parliamentarium at the European Parliament here in Brussels. The thing is billed as a visitor centre, but in fact it's a propaganda centre, a multi-million-pound way for the members of the European Parliament to stroke their own egos. So how many multi-millions of taxpayers' money has gone into this thing? The Parliament's press people admit 18 million pounds has been spent on it. But with the bookkeeping standards in the EU institutions, the real amount is anybody's guess, because they lied about everything else before this. Besides being a vanity project for the members of the European Parliament, things also a way for the EU institutions to brainwash school children who are invited to come in groups to join a multimodal role play game in which they can take on the role of a member of the European Parliament and go through all the steps needed to approve a new European law. Well, I guess you give them a bunch of cash and tell them how to bribe somebody. Yes, laws come from Europe, not from Westminster anymore, but I'd hardly take a British child on holiday to Brussels to celebrate that disaster. Take him instead to the House of Commons and let him lay a wreath. But it's worse than that. Consider what kind of exhibitions the children will be herded past on the way to the 360-degree digital projection of the Parliament's plenary chamber. Most revolting is a long dark corridor with a line of illuminated pictures which are part of a journey through time. Run an 8-year-old child past those and you'll come out at the end imagining, and what appears to be the purpose, that before the European institutions set up shop, the countries of the European continent could be nothing but a rubble-strewn wasteland. They're actually eradicating the history for these children, you understand. There was nothing happened before it was created. Everybody lived in mud huts and wore furs, I guess. And that was it, and run about with clubs. I'm not kidding you. Yeah. Examples, just one picture illustrates Italy in the early 20th century, and it shows Mussolini's march on Rome, the Netherlands in 1949, a grim border post with nearby propaganda, insisting that transport across Europe was very complicated and had to overcome various bureaucratic obstacles. Well, they didn't give you pat-downs in those days, actually. It was quite easy. Amazing. This is an EU institution tutting bureaucratic obstacles. Go ask the first small businessman you find about just what sort of bureaucratic obstacles the EU now puts up to him getting on and doing his business anywhere, much less across borders. Then Poland gets 2 pictures to illustrate its history. The first picture is 1939 Nazis. Nothing happened before that. There was no Poland, you know. Second picture, 1943, more Nazis. Spain, 1939, gets a picture of Republican forces who were defeated by Franco, but the Parliament spares the Republican forces any mention of their Soviet communist backing. Well, it doesn't surprise me when you look at this, who set up and who runs at the top this new Soviet European Union. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix, just talking about how children going through this new EU propaganda building they've erected there, the children are showing nothing but horror and primitivism basically in all the countries and through all these photographs. And that's imprinted in their minds with the very young, remember. And it tells you how bad things were, all things so terrible, etc. There's no culture whatsoever. And it says, then Poland gets 2 pictures to illustrate its history. First, the Nazis. Second picture, more Nazism. Spain, 39, gets a picture of Republican forces. No mention of the Soviet communist backing for the other side. The United Kingdom finally gets a mention on the history wall, and this ought to frighten the wits of any 8-year-old you might be foolish enough to take to this place. It shows you London, 1941, children at Causeway School sitting in class wearing gas masks, while the recording repeats over and over again, what in concrete and practical terms does the independence of nations mean in the world of today, a world of the closest economic and political interdependence, which means the destiny of all mankind is indivisible. And then Berlin, poverty, hunger, 1948, And then hallelujah, which is the response we're supposed to have, since what we're dealing with here is a temple dedicated to the cult of Europe, a picture of a European movement gathering in Brussels in 1949, a mass gathering in support of European unification. So I looked pretty close to it. I couldn't see any acknowledgement that through the 1950s and into the 1960s, the European movement was secretly financed by the CIA as part of its Cold War strategy against the Soviet bloc. And it says, nor, for my example, was there any mention that the poverty and hunger in Berlin in that 1948 picture was caused not by enough Europe, but by too much Soviet aggression. The Soviet communists blockaded Berlin, and the only thing that kept the people of Berlin alive was the Berlin airlift, led by the Royal Air Force and the US Air Force and other allied forces, all of them from countries which the Europeans of today dismiss as Anglo-Saxon. It says, nor indeed was there any mention I could find, because the Stuttgart firm that designed this expedition, or rather designed at your expense, a dynamic sequence of individual environments like spotlights coming out of darkness, resulting in some of the most unpleasant, hard to see individual environments you could imagine. Sorry, I started to say that there was no mention I could find of the way the Marshall Plan money from the United States taxpayers turned that rubble of Germany into the industrial giant of the 1960s. Airlift Marshall Plan, and on and on. And you'd think the members of the European Parliament would at least find a spot in the dynamical sequence of individual environments to put up a poster saying, thank you, Uncle Sam. And on it goes, and on it goes, and on it goes. In other words, pure left propaganda. But it's run by the bankers, the same bankers, boys, that run all of us, you know. The left is all run by the bankers. They prefer a socialist society. That's really massive bureaucracies running the people beneath them in a very Soviet-type style. It's very orderly for them. Everything's orderly. Everything can be done very quickly through any segment of society because of the massive bureaucracies. And they love big bureaucracies too. It means governments are always borrowing from you to pay all the cash that they're going to pay their employees and for all their projects. So this is the system run by really the far right that owns the far left, doing the same old darn thing again and recreating history all over once again for you. You can't get away from it. Doesn't matter where you look. They've been at it for centuries, as I say. They're not stupid. And they know what's coming up. They don't let things happen. They make sure that they guide all movements. And actually they put out the leaders to often guide them for them. Now there's callers there. There's Larry from L.A. Are you there, Larry? Larry? Hello?
Yeah, now can you hear me, Alan?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Okay, good. You mentioned an act of violence, and I've been wondering why generation after generation the children are brought up and they get it in them that they want to join some kind of army and they really want to kill another man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now where it says that all persons, now we're going to take the definition of persons here as people, all persons born or naturalized and subject to the law. The words "and subject to the law" right there is an act of violence, because no man or men or paper with ink on it has the right to subjugate all people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that's true. I mean, a dictator can do that too, you know.
So we're brought up in a society where acts of violence, even in the words they call law, are brought against us as little children up through the schools, and it teaches them that it's some kind of a glorious thing to go kill your fellow man.
Oh, absolutely. I just watched a documentary. It's about psychopaths, actually, but it's how they use what they've learned about the psychopathic person to indoctrinate the Marines and other soldiers too, so they can make them go off and kill, because they admit it's not a natural thing for humans to do, you know, for normal folk to do. But they actually use those techniques that they've learned through psychiatry and psychology and experiments to train them to go off and be killers. So they will not even think about it. They'll just kill by reflex, basically. So you're quite right, you know. And it's an odd thing. You're quite right, too. It's an oddest thing where you'd be punished at home for killing someone, and at the same time, you're rewarded to go off abroad and kill for a system, a private corporation that owns you.
That's exactly right. Now, on those black boxes, the cameras now got signs on them that says they're going to give you a speeding ticket. So it went from a red light to a speeding camera, and the 2010 automobile that I bought from the factory came with no radio in it. But it's got an antenna on it, and it's transmitting.
It's transmitting, sure it is. Yeah. Yeah. They want to know everywhere you're going, where you've been, how long you stayed, and, what route you took back, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's already in the police cars. He can be sitting 10 miles down the road just waiting for you because they can already see that you're speeding.
Mm-hmm. And also it said in Article 2, this article here I'll put up tonight, that they know how many folk are in the car, and if they're all using their seatbelts. Yeah.